Welcome back to the Spiritable podcast. My name is Luke, and on this episode we're on with Rujuta, who's a Hindu, and we're talking about the intersection between religion and culture, among other things.
And we talked a lot about pushing back against tradition. We talked about gender issue in religious history, and we talked about differences and cultural differences between religions.
It's a good, relevant conversation, and I hope that you stick around. Thanks for watching and thanks for listening.
Welcome to the Spiritable podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Luke. Basically, we started this podcast as a place to bring spirituality down to earth. For a whole myriad of reasons, talking about your faith, belief, religion, it's kind of a minefield, but we don't always think that's the best barrier to keep up. So personally, we're coming at this from a perspective of Christianity with a little bit of a twist, and you can check out episode 9 for more on that.
What we'd like to do is bring on guests with a whole variety of different spiritual backgrounds to help challenge our own beliefs, and hopefully to learn something together about how to be useful people. So thanks for joining us on Spiritable.
Are we rolling on all ends?
Yes, we are.
Fantastic. So for this episode, I want to give a quick little disclaimer. Obviously, we are not in our usual space here. We have a temporary setup going on while our other studio is in the works, so hopefully good things to come. Also, I'm by myself. We got rid of Ben. We fired him. He was terrible. Just kidding. No, Ben was busy, so no co-host today. I'm rolling solo. And also, we usually say this at the end of the podcast, but if you're interested in just getting the audio only, go search for that on Spotify or iTunes, Google Play, all those places you just find the audio podcasts, and give it a listen there. Also, the YouTube's just on YouTube, so if you want to see the video and you're listening to the audio, go to YouTube. Bam! Did it. First try. Good?
Yes.
Nice.
That'll work. Search Spiritable, those places.
Search Spiritable. Spiritable podcast. Anyway, I want to welcome our guest here, Rujuta. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I want to give a little intro to who you are here, and we'll see how well I do, and you can correct me where I'm wrong.
Okay.
So, basically what I know is that you grew up in India. Mm-hmm. You grew up in sort of a Hindu household that was pretty accepting of other faiths. Mm-hmm. And then you moved to America at which age?
22.
When you were 22. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool. So you moved to America, and right now you work at Temple University as assistant professor, assistant director of gender, sexuality and women's studies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you work in that, and I just learned when we were talking before we started rolling here that you're transitioning into becoming a counselor. You're taking counseling classes.
Yes, I am.
Nice. How has that been?
It's been great. It's been, I see it as a continuum in terms of teaching. I did a lot of work in domestic violence sphere. So as I started working in that, I realized I didn't just want to hear stories from women. I actually wanted to make a change and create a change.
That makes sense.
So that sort of brought me into the realm of counseling psychology, which I had been interested for a very long time anyway. So when I turned 40, I decided I needed to do something that I absolutely wanted to do in my life. And so I made that switch a couple of years ago. I mean,
Nice.
in terms of...
I think that's a pretty natural transition too of learning about something in a more academic way and then realizing how important something is and being like, I really want to get involved hands-on and make that change. I remember I was working for the government for a little bit, and it was very overhead work, and nothing felt like it hit the ground. Right. So it was hard for me to really feel empowered by it. And I was like, I need to work on something like on the ground, physically, like be involved.
Absolutely.
And that's obviously like why I love this podcast, because I get to have this conversation with you. We get like an hour to just chat about religion and stuff,
yeah.
which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So how far along are you in your master's program?
I should be done in May 2020.
Okay, it's coming up.
Yes.
And you already have a PhD?
I do.
Okay.
I have a PhD in African American Studies.
Oh, wow. So you're very well studied. Look at you.
Yes, I took my time. I took my time.
Nice.
And so, I mean, in keeping with domestic violence, because I felt the disconnect between theory and practice.
What do you mean by the disconnect? Just like couldn't do anything about it?
Yeah, so I worked, in the domestic violence sort of agency.
Right.
But I was teaching my students all of this feminist theory, and it was amazing, but I didn't feel sort of I was working on the ground, like you said.
At the crux of the issue.
Yeah, and so I actually developed a course called domestic violence at the university. And so that is sort of my main class that I teach every fall. And then I sort of also moved into counseling psychology.
Okay, so you're in the middle of teaching that class right now.
Right now.
How's
yes.
that going?
Amazing.
Yeah?
I mean, the students are amazing, and I'm able to sort of teach that class in terms of what I see at grassroots level.
yeah.
I'm talking to women, I'm working with women.
Well, it's a nice area where... Ugh, I had to clear my throat. That's a nice area where what you learn in your counseling set or classes kind of helps you be a better teacher, and what you learn
Yes.
From teaching helps you be a better counselor. So it's
Absolutely.
Like this nice
And
combination.
that well said, because that's how I see that.
Yeah.
So I don't see it as an absolute transition or a switch in careers. I actually see that as a spectrum, as a continuum
Okay.
of where I was and where I'm going.
Right. So what led you to that interest in gender and sexuality and women's studies and going into partner violence and that kind of thing?
So once I finished my PhD, I started, I was teaching, and I was trying to figure out what I loved doing. And so one of the things that I actually did my dissertation on was sort of this Black feminist theory looking into lesbian violence. And so there was some sort of thought there of looking into lesbian suicide pacts and things like that in India. And so that sort of led, it's
stuff.
a long process, yes.
Wow.
So that sort of led to domestic violence.
So what led to your academic interest in those subjects in the first place? Like, how did you
Long
decide that was
story.
your PhD and that kind of
Yeah, so I was in India, I did my bachelor's in English literature.
thing? Okay.
And one of the areas where they had just started looking into was women's studies and African literature. And that was what you would call my major there.
Okay.
And so I got interested in African literature, African American literature, and then feminist. So that sort of
led that
progressed.
direction.
Yes.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah.
How has it felt for you? Well, I want to touch on your religious background a little bit too. So have you always been Hindu or?
Yes. So I was born in a Brahmin Hindu family.
Okay.
My grandfather didn't really believe in God, but he believed in the religion, which is very strange. But, he was very much a strong Hindu man and worked a lot with the Hindu political party in India. And my father too was he didn't really believe in God, but also did the same, what my grandfather was doing. So I grew up Hindu, but as a young person, I really challenged Hinduism because I think most of the times what happens is as a teenager, as a young person, you don't want to follow just the traditions to follow traditions.
Tradition for tradition's sake.
Right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times growing up, I wasn't allowed to question those traditions, or even a lot of times I didn't get answers. So if I asked, why do we do this? The answer was because my parents have done, their parents have done, our ancestors have done.
Right.
And even as a young person, I was very much curious about the caste system, about challenging the caste system. Why is it there? Why are we Brahmins and some other people not allowed in the temple? I mean, those were questions. I always had those questions. Why wasn't I allowed to play with this friend whom I love hanging out with? But, the answer was, that's because it's not allowed. And so I thought Hinduism did not work for me at all. But as I grew older, I came to the US, I suddenly realized I wasn't the majority. And it was a shock. I was very much oblivious to the privileges I had growing up in India as a Brahmin, middle class.
What were some of those
girl.
privileges compared to what you experienced in America?
I think just being Hindu, because India is about 80 to 85% Hindu. Being Brahmin, which is sort of the top of the caste system, being middle class, which is a good place to be in, even as a girl, I mean, my family comes from a very education focused background. My dad was a doctor, medical doctor. My grandfather was a medical doctor. My grandmother actually was a nurse. So I always questioned, traditions and rituals. And
How old were you when you were like questioning all that?
all my life, I
Yeah.
think. All my life. I mean,
Even
I
now,
followed.
are you still like a person who
I
questions
do.
things?
Yeah, I think that's where my background comes in. My training in African American studies, I was talking about privileges. So challenging privilege, challenging, sort of understanding that this is a privilege I can use towards working for the better of a group of people.
Yeah.
And so I always I had that in me ever since I remember. So coming here, I realized, well, I'm sort of the minority. Very few people are Hindu. And I came here in 97 when there weren't as many Indians as there are today, which is amazing because now my kids have the opportunity to see people like them, and we've always sort of promoted diversity here for our kids too.
That's great.
So yeah.
Nice. That's fantastic. So coming from a Hindu background, or actually, what a question. So when did you start to pick back up your religious roots?
That's
like if
really-
you questioned it
yeah.
for so long, what led you to bringing it back?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think I started around early 2000s, but I think it really solidified once I had my daughter.
Yeah.
And suddenly I was here in the US trying to figure out how my daughter is going to be raised here. And so one of the first things that I did was when she was around 5, she entered kindergarten, there was an Indian Sunday school. And I thought, oh, you know what, I have to take her there because I don't feel prepared to teach her about Hinduism. And I wanted her to have that grounding. I wanted her to have her roots, that she should know what her culture is because, growing up, although I questioned everything, I still felt safe in being and recognizing who I was.
Well, and I would imagine that's part of your identity and your roots. And it's nice to feel seen by your kids and understood and be able to understand them along the same lines.
Absolutely. And so I started taking her to the Indian school, but then it just became overwhelming. Sunday, all day long, it was 45 minutes away.
Oh, okay.
And one fine day, my husband said to me, hey, you complain all the time of driving, and why don't we just start something local?
Right, yeah.
And so we did in 2013. And by that time I had my son. We started, we rented the local school and classrooms at a local school, and we started teaching there.
Okay.
And so we started with 25 kids. Now we have about 40.
Wow, that's fun.
Yeah, and it's fun. It's really fun. And I'm relearning, and one of the things that I think is so important for kids is for these kids is that they're able to ask questions. And we try to answer them to the best possible way we can. And there's no, we don't say, well, it's because we did this. No, if you're going to question, then we have to think and discuss and critically think about ways in which it can be beneficial.
Right. So was your draw back to Hinduism more cultural, or was it more of a religious dogma of Hinduism, or a combination thereof? What brings you to it?
So absolutely no dogma in my life.
Yeah?
No, I don't think so. Because I think, again, the ability to be able to question something and questioning the absoluteness of something is very critical to me.
I agree. I think it's critical in life.
Yeah, right?
We've talked about that before on the podcast with guests of how important it is to rigorously question your own beliefs and not just believe something because someone told you to,
right,
or because of tradition's sake, but to really figure out what you believe for yourself and follow that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't think I can have sort of that. I also think Hinduism is viewed more as a culture rather than as a religious dogma. And having said that, there is factions of Hinduism
Sure.
that are very sort of what you would call fundamentalist. But overall, when you look at Hinduism, it allows you to view it as a cultural basis for existing.
Okay.
Because there's so many deities. I mean, a stone is a deity, you know. There's no one way of doing things. So there can be big festivals like Diwali that we all, you know, celebrate as Hindus. But there's no one way of praying. There's no one way of
These are your personal
looking.
beliefs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, Hinduism allows you to do that.
Yeah.
It's more pluralistic in that sense. And that's what I appreciate about that.
Yeah.
So there can be, you know, there's the Bhagavad Gita that people follow. There's Ramayana, there's Mahabharata. There are various Vedic literature that you can take from and follow. There's no one way. And that makes it very, to me, very appealing.
Yeah.
And for young people, it becomes very appealing.
Yeah, that's one thing I really like about my own religion, and we've touched on that before in previous episodes. But we basically have a belief that, at the most simplistic, if you live a good life and do what is right by what you've deemed to be correct, then you're doing a good job. Then
Right.
your afterlife or what happens next is gonna be good for you. Because I grew up in a pretty evangelical Christian community, and went to a youth group there for a little bit, and was just pretty uncomfortable with a lot of the dogma that I did encounter, which was essentially, you know, if you didn't believe in Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior, then you were going to hell.
Right.
And it never clicked for me. That didn't make any sense. Like, what about people who had never even heard of Jesus or had grown up for their whole lives believing in Allah? And of course they wouldn't convert. Like, why would they? Why would I convert to another? It's like there's a lack of humility there that to me seems very absent of God and never really fit. So I like the sort of pluralism of Hinduism and just being accepting of people in all kinds of different ways. And yeah, there's no one right way to pray or to connect to your God or anything like that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I like that a lot.
And a lot of, I mean, history shows that Hindus never really went out to convert people.
The whole evangelization is a weird thing. I don't know, just like converting people. It's just so forceful.
But I mean, you know, some Hindus did convert because of the caste system. They converted to Christianity, and you know, because there was colonialism and things like that in India. So that did happen, but that was something that didn't sort of. There wasn't sort of converting back. You know, you come back to us.
Right.
So that I like the fact that there is room to be able to interpret things the way we do want to. And also, I think it's very important to understand the history and the historical times and the context. I mean, you can't have 2,000-year-old ideology which can be applicable today. And I think that...
Especially in the specifics. I feel like the overall message you can still apply, but like if you look back in Deuteronomy, we're not following that today in Christianity.
Yeah, absolutely. And so again, that allows us to sort of question and change and, you know, be more... adaptable, yeah.
Right. So I'm curious how the mixture between your cultural and religious background fits in with all of the social issues that you're involved in personally and academically. Because I think, especially today, that's a hard thing for people to do, to mix social activism with religious identity. Because in a lot of more traditional religions, there's, you know, historical oppression of women in marriages.
Absolutely.
There's very clear like gender roles that are oppositional to today. So how has that been for you to navigate your expertise with your religion?
So I think one of the first things is to be able to question, which I did. And if you look at history and historical sort of context with women in Hinduism, women have always been at least some, let me say some, not all, but,
You don't want to generalize too much.
yeah, have been in positions of power. So we've had goddesses, we've had a prime minister of India who was a woman. We've had sort of women in positions of sort of power in terms of writing, literature, history. So there have been role models. There have been women in my regional, area where I grew up in Maharashtra, which is a state in India.
Okay.
Where there were women who fought to get the right to education, and this was in the early 19th century. So there have been role models. There have been sort of women who have done a lot more than we know in history books.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, even with the Sunday Indian school that we run, I make it a point to bring that.
Nice.
That it's. I mean, there's a lot there that doesn't get talked about. And so, yes, we live in a patriarchal world. Yes, India is a very patriarchal society. Yes, we've had a lot of issues with gender and sexuality in India. But there's also a need to educate the population about history and how that can have an impact.
Wow. That's impressive. And that's where a lot of things start, is on that first very basic level of education and spreading awareness about stuff to help people go and just take that. Because you never know the ramifications of someone then being well-rounded and something like that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Do you find that religion plays at all in like what you bring to the courses that you teach?
I think it informs...
Like on that subject?
Yes, absolutely. It informs, I think, my teaching, it informs my counseling, and it informs my parenting. Because I think with teaching, for example, students are always struggling, one, with theory and practice, two, with what does all of this mean, right? And there are so many existential questions that students have, that clients have in counseling. And I think for me, I look at Hinduism not as a total religion. I look at it as spiritual, right? And for me, spirituality is about seeking something higher than me. Whether it's hope, whether it's God, whether it's any kind of power, it's fine. But that seeking, that purpose comes from that seeking. And so a lot of times when students ask me questions, when clients ask me questions, when my own kids ask me questions, I'm able to tap into, for example, mythology that we have, that Hinduism has, for example, the Ramayana or the Mahabharata. And then there are so many different people in those mythologies. So there are, Lord Shiva is basically half woman, half man. And so I'm able to talk about that in, different settings.
Yeah.
So it informs everything, I
Nice.
think. Yeah.
I don't know if you saw it, but we recently released a video on domestic violence.
I look forward to seeing that.
Yeah, I'll have to send it to you afterward. But it was a really empowering video for us to produce, because we worked with 6 different faith leaders to put the video together. And we had them all deliver the same script, the same message, and then we had an open-ended interview at the end. So it was a nice way for traditional faiths to make a tangible stance today about something that really matters, domestic violence, and say, no, it's never okay. There's never an excuse for that kind of thing. But so in our filming process, we went to I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, Bharativa Vidyalaya Temple.
Yeah, Bharatiya Vidyalaya.
There you go. Much better than me. And interviewed a guy named Praveen Sharma there, and he gave us a tour of the whole place. And it was really my first experience with religious and cultural Hinduism, because I took a comparative religious studies course once, but I'd never really I don't think I have any Hindu friends or anything like that, besides you now.
Yes.
But it was really neat to understand the religion, and I have a lot of respect for it. I love the way the different gods represent different aspects, different values, and the genders involved there all play a part. Yeah. And I think one of my favorite things too was the worshiping and the prayer process of how many different elements are involved. Like you see something, you make contact with the ground, you smell the offering, you hear music, like involving every one of your
Yes.
senses to pray. It was so cool to me.
Yeah.
I loved that.
Yeah.
And I've tried to think about how to incorporate some of that sort of stuff into my own life, because I often will get distracted when I try to connect with God and that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that. But it was neat to see how inclusive it was of everything, and how eager they were to be a part and share what they had and love it. So yeah, that was really nice. That was also just a beautiful place. Oh my gosh. It's gorgeous.
I think all places of worship are beautiful and calming and peaceful, and that's the purpose, I think.
Yeah.
So that people come there to get that aspect and get the social aspect of meeting other people, of sort of like-minded people. And I think growing up, I remember my maternal grandmother needed help, walking. So as a young teenager, she would ask me to take her to the temple, and I was probably 10, 12, 13, I don't remember, but every morning she would wake me up at 5:30. Before going to the temple, we have to shower, so we would shower and then I would take her to the temple, and that's where I learned community service. I learned giving back, so what we call seva, to serve. Because I remember her going in, doing the offering, praying, talking to her friends. In the meantime, she would say, okay, now there were beggars sitting outside the temple, go give them food to eat from the offerings, see what they need, or make a garland sitting there and then offer it to God. And so when I saw all of that, I knew that there's a connection, there is sort of this symbiosis, if you will. We are all connected, that we have to give back. And so coming back to the Indian school here, that's one of the things that we do. It's community service.
To give back.
To give back. That's sort of, I feel, the ultimate purpose of life. Because what I have, I'm so grateful that I have had the opportunity. So many opportunities, right? And so those things come from religion. Those things come from places of worship. If done correctly, it's really something that makes us see the divine in each other.
Yeah.
And connect
That's
with
beautiful.
that. Yeah. Oh,
I
thank
love
you.
that. No, I was in it. That was very well spoken.
Thank you.
Yeah, I really, really like that. And it seems like now you're kind of coming into that ultimate purpose of you learned how to have that community service growing up and going to the temple with your grandma, and now you're kind of doing that in a professional way with becoming a counselor and being able to serve people
Yes.
in that way and bring it more into your day-to-day life.
Thank you.
Which is cool.
Yeah.
That's a neat full circle. So.
I think that's where I learned with my grandparents, because in India we actually live with our extended families. You may not live in one house, but we are very close by, and so there's sort of that cycle of life too. Because when my grandparents needed help, my parents would send us. Okay, they need to be walked to the temple, or they're not well. You go, take care of them. So it's sort of learning to take care of your elders in ways that you're giving back to. So that cycle of life was very sort of prevalent, and it was connecting with everyone. That was the main sort of idea.
Yeah. Do you miss that at all from being back in India? Like, do you miss that in American culture and society? It sounds like you've kind of created that for yourself a little bit by having the Sunday school and teaching.
Yeah.
But I imagine culturally it must be very different.
I do now. So as again in my 20s,
when you were rebellious and questioning
20s, I was like, I just want to go because a lot of times it's also overwhelming to have that.
Yeah, almost oppressive.
Not
actually.
No,
but.
it's a burden. You know that, oh goodness, I would rather go out, hang out with my friends,
Right.
but now I have to go take care of my grandparents. I mean, you learn the sense of duty, and you learn sort of sense of taking care and being available for your family and friends. But in 20s and 30s, it's like, nah,
Yeah.
But now that I have my own children, I think it's coming back. It's sort of, I need that. I want my kids to see that. that everything is not about you. It's about more.
I'm sure they love hearing that too. Especially your daughter.
Yes,
Your
it
13-year-old.
is really difficult because they've heard it all and they're like, okay, no more talking, mom, no more talking. Yeah.
I'm curious because I think the mixture of culture and religion is fascinating. So I'm curious how it was for you, especially with these social issues and your area of expertise in gender and women's studies and sexuality, how that was, if you could contrast and compare that religiously and culturally in India and religiously and culturally in America. Like that's a big question, so feel free to dissect it. But how does that compare to you?
You mean in terms of American culture and Indian culture in sort of...
Yeah, well, and seeing the sort of larger religious cultural sphere of both places, and just coming at it with your background. Like it sounds like there were in India, culture and religion was very mixed, and you had the caste system and that kind of thing. So you already said it was sort of a shock for you when you came to America. But I'm wondering, just how that compares, mixing religion and social issues in both places.
I think in India I was still learning. So I'm not sort of from that perspective. I was more rebellious because I could say things and I could do things. And even if I wasn't allowed to play with this friend who was not a Brahmin, I would still go play.
Go and do it.
Yeah, I would. But now that I do see that rebellion in ways that really allowed me. I mean, my family also allowed me that space. I wasn't sort of punished. I was told that this is not something we do. But even if I played with her, it wasn't that I was punished afterwards. It was just like, oh, you don't listen. You need to understand that this is not something we do. So that allowed for that space in terms of being someone, whether I was a girl or my brother. I mean, again, my family was so education focused, and I think a lot of middle class families in a city like Bombay, where I grew up, it's Mumbai now, that again, being of middle class and certain background gave me that opportunity to be rebellious, to be, it sort of made it okay that it's fine, you go out there. Yeah. I won't say that for all of India or all of those places.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's very intersectional, and that's what I see in America as well.
Right.
Everything is very intersectional. So to have an African American woman in Philadelphia with poverty, for example, it's really hard not having resources to be able to do that. Right. I didn't see intersectionality in my mind growing up in India because I was in it and I had the opportunities and I was very oblivious.
Right. Well, sometimes you have to get outside of it to really realize what it was.
Right. And I had that same mindset when I came here that I'm the majority. I'm great. I have all these opportunities. I'm in a PhD program, But then one day I was asked how it felt to be a minority, and I said, are you talking to me? Coming from sort of a big city in India. But eventually, as I grew up, I hopefully grew a little bit wiser, understood what privilege meant, what oppression looked like. So in terms of that intersectionality and understanding of that, it helped me also understand how my religious background, my culture could work to help, in terms of talking about the intersectionalities in Hinduism, that it's okay to be of any caste or class, but you have this opportunity to be able to look at a power beyond you, Right. So I sort of understood that, that I think, and I do miss having that extended family. I do miss having that sort of opportunity.
I think that's something we miss in America too.
Yeah. So I do see that here that
Yeah.
I wish my kids had. But my kids have other
Other things that you didn't have, yeah.
And also we've developed relationships with people so
Yeah.
that they do have they can see other people in their lives as godparents or friends
Right.
or uncles and aunts. We call everyone uncle and aunt in India who are older than us.
Oh, really? Oh, that's something I didn't
So
know.
they're all uncles and aunties for them.
Well, did you have any standout experiences shifting from a place where you were a majority to being a minority? Like, I know you said you kind of still thought you were in the majority here, but did anything stand out to you as oh wait, I'm a minority?
Yeah, actually, I remember when I was in the PhD program, I was the only Indian in the program, and African American Studies program, right? So I remember someone asking me, "How does it feel to be an Indian in an African American Studies program?" And I said, "Oh, wait a minute."
Like, you didn't even.
I didn't even realize that because I thought we were all here as students.
Yeah, I like that perspective. So,
Yeah.
That seems the right way to view it.
Yeah, and that, but what that made me realize is that I cannot be arrogant. That I cannot be in a program or a place where I have that arrogance of being either a majority or a mindset of being, I know better because,
It's
hey,
humility. It's humble.
yeah. So it really challenged my
Good for you.
arrogance. Yeah, and it really challenged me to think and learn
Yeah.
that I'm not part of this culture, whether it's, African American culture, American culture, or any culture,
Right.
that I'm not actually to learn. I have to make a commitment to actually understand. And what that means to me is to be able to have conversations with people who are different than me,
Right.
to have that humility, to accept that I can be wrong about certain things, and have that willingness to have an open mind.
Yeah, I'm super impressed because that's a hard mindset to have. Because I feel like a lot of people, it's easy to take the other road of being like, okay, well, I don't care about it then, or feeling a negativity toward how you're being viewed or the challenge that you're facing. So that's super impressive that you were able to find the
Thank
positives and better yourself. Like that's I'm very impressed.
Oh,
That'd be
thank you.
Yeah, I did want to talk to you about your interest and study in domestic violence
Mm-hmm.
because that's something that's just increasingly, at least our awareness of it is increasingly prevalent. It's been happening forever, but I think we're at a point in time where a lot of different people are becoming more aware of it and pushing back on it and realizing all these different facets of what constitutes domestic violence. So how did you kind of get into that? Was it your studies in genders and sexuality and culture that you're like, oh wow, this is a big issue that I need to delve into more?
Yeah.
Or how did that come about for you?
Yeah, I was always interested in sort of thinking about violence and mostly sexual violence because growing up in India, street harassment was something that was so routine.
Really?
I mean, it's
Normalized?
very normalized, extremely normalized.
Do you think it is still?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's sad.
Yeah, extremely normalized. So going on a train to work or to the university, we were just used to that.
Yeah.
We were also used to we as in women were used to knowing how to manage that and maneuver that and also negotiate that. But in terms,
I'm sorry. Well, it's not something you should have to negotiate.
I know, absolutely. As an adult, I really,
Right.
But going to the university, I remember feeling extremely angry on the train because someone was saying things that, and I was pretty vocal in answering back because I felt...
Standing up for yourself. Good for you.
Because I felt that there has to be some sort of subversive, back answering so that this person understood how he was making me feel. So that was something that I was interested in. But when I started writing my dissertation, that was when I was pretty much focused on sort of the the suicide pacts that lesbians were making in India and then completing suicide. So I was interested in that. It's just that I didn't have room or mind space to sort of focus only on that. Once I started teaching at Temple, I realized that I wanted to focus more on violence. And then I also saw a lot of domestic violence within the Indian community here and how that was viewed. And so I started working in that area to just sort of understand it, just sort of see how many people called in. So I was on the hotline usually on weekends.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow, good for
that's
you.
how I started.
Okay.
With an organization out of New Jersey. And they only focused on South Asian women. And it was hard. It was
Yeah.
hard to sort of take those calls and
believe
talk to women. But what that also did was it really informed me of the prevalence and the deep-rooted sexism and the deep-rooted sort of even not even understanding what domestic violence was.
The lack of clarity around it.
Recognizing what domestic violence was. So then I started just sort of working in that area.
Wow. Do you think that domestic violence or like that harassment, street harassment, that kind of thing, is more prevalent culturally in India than it is here? Is that because I mean I've never traveled to India. I'm not really sure.
So I do see, for example, in Philadelphia, catcalling is something that is super normalized. And so is it in a place like Bombay, which is, if you were to imagine Mumbai, and I'm sorry, I keep shifting between Mumbai and Bombay because I grew up saying Bombay.
One and the same.
And then they changed the name. It's like New York City. There are so many people out on the street.
It's so hard for me to understand a person who does that.
Yeah.
Like, I could not, like, I would be horrified if one of my friends did that.
Yeah.
I would be so repulsed.
Right.
And it's interesting for me to think about how people can rationalize that. Like, I know in Christianity for a long time there was like sort of a misunderstanding of the Bible in people saying wives should submit to their husbands, and just using that to the nth degree. So is there a way people like rationalize it in Hinduism to the same degree? Like, where does that come from?
I think there's an intersection of patriarchy and culture, right? And there are, if I were to talk about the Mahabharata, for example, there is this situation wherein, and I can't go into great detail because it's a long narrative, but in one instance, Draupadi, who is one of the queen, is married to 5 husbands, they're brothers, and there's sort of a background story to that. But in one of the sort of, how do I put it? One of the stories is that the eldest brother, who's supposed to represent morality and righteousness, gambles her off in a game of gambling, and then the war happens because she then decides that this is not what. How is this possible? You gamble me, I'm not your property. And if you did gamble me, then now you get back my honor. So there's this whole sort of narrative. So yes, even in Hinduism and mythologies, you do see sort of this absolute ownership of the woman. And what does honor mean? And why is it placed only on the woman? Right? Her honor is at stake. Their honor was at stake. They're gambling. But that's not talked about. It's her honor. Other mythologies like the Ramayana, the main sort of Sita, who is Lord Ram's wife, is kidnapped by this demon, if you will, monster. Now Ram has to get back her honor because, she's his wife, but also then someone in his country, sort of in India, as he brings her back, someone out of the audience says that, hey, how do we know your wife is pure? and so he makes her walk on fire to prove that.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are a lot of narratives where this concept of ownership and property is relevant, prevalent.
And that's what I think it is too. It's narratives. It's stories that have that interplay as a background, because it's not like there are lots of times in these holy books where it says this is how men should treat women, this is how women should treat men, but there's a lot of backstory of, in the Bible, Abraham giving away his wife, or a woman having to like seduce people to be relevant.
Absolutely.
It's horrifying. But so that's something I'm just thinking about now is how much that affects the way people had historically have thought gender roles should be, just because it's these stories showing how other people did it. So it's like, oh, well, we should live like the Bible, I guess, or live like these mythology stories. And it's not like they're spelled out specifically, but it's these narratives that are weaving this sort of history in culture that is very much should be history or mythology and should be left there and not adapted to right now. But I think we have this sort of gap where we try to adapt that or are stuck in that. When we're not being told to live that way, we shouldn't live that way. It's not relevant anymore.
Yeah, and that's what I tell my students and my clients, that yes, religion, spirituality should play a role, if you believe it should have a big role in your life, in your grounding, in your roots, understanding who you are. But everything needs to be placed within their historical context. It cannot be taken out of that historical context. Now,
or ignored because it is there.
It doesn't make sense.
Right.
And even, for example, the stories that I told you now, they never had a place. They shouldn't have had a place. But if they are, they cannot be reworked and repeated in movies, for example, in shows, because then that's the narrative. So when I was growing up, 80s, 90s, the movies were full of this, replaying what these mythologies were telling us. And then there was no criticism or questioning. I mean, there were feminists who were doing that, but they were on the margins of society. And so that also didn't make sense to me as to why that should be.
Yeah, no, definitely. And at the same time, we can't ignore that it was there. Like today, we don't want to perpetuate the same sort of thing. But we can't ignore that it was a factor in society and culture. And I don't know if, are you familiar with the Looney Tunes at all? Like the cartoons?
I've heard of them.
Well, there have been some that have been republished. And at the beginning, they have a big disclaimer from the company saying basically that, hey, this represents a period in history where these sort of values were unfortunately normalized. Because I think Looney Tunes had like blackface and just like stereotypes, lots of different things that are not great. But I think that company is doing a good job of not ignoring it and recognizing it for what it was and not saying it's good, but saying, hey, we can learn from this. This is a part of our history. We are sad, like we're not happy that it was what it was, but we need to recognize it and move forward. So account for that history and tradition.
And also challenge
the most
it.
interesting example of that is Pepe Le Pew is a Looney Tunes character. Is a we definitely don't need anything adjusted yet.
Zoom it down.
Okay, you're talking to me. Pepe Le Pew is a Looney Tunes character, and he's a French skunk, and his whole joke, every episode that he's in, and he's in dozens of them, is that there is a black cat that through some joke or something gets a white stripe painted up her back so she looks like a skunk. And so Pepe Le Pew, being French, I guess it's also not very charitable to French people, just immediately then wants to capture her heart. So it is him just aggressively hunting down this woman in ways that are like, watching it just with a modern lens, it is like it's very, very uncomfortable. Like him just like grabbing her, trying to do anything he can to like capture her, and it like poses it as romance. But like even the female cat character in the cartoons is terrified of him. So it plays this like weird archaic piece of humor that does not work at all anymore. But yeah, anyway, interesting how the times change.
And also I think it's very important to acknowledge that, but also to sort of say that this was not something that should have been, sort of going back and saying that this is a challenge. We challenge this, and we understand that we need to move on from these tropes of,
Yeah, and
violence.
wiping it out entirely is like, some people say
Yeah.
like, oh, well, let's just get rid of it. But I think that then like ignores that
Right.
certain people did think that
Right.
this
Yeah. You
was
can't. You
fun.
can't wash it over.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's
Because-
important to like acknowledge it and separate yourself.
Absolutely, yeah.
Good
I'm not-
interjection.
but I'm not-
Thank you.
See you guys.
I zoomed away from you. I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Yeah. No, I think that's fascinating. No, I think that's really relevant. And I was thinking about this earlier, but with religion and social activism, I think both things have a lot of academia and theory involved. Like with, like I know you have some expertise in like transnational feminisms, that kind of thing. So there's a lot to like learn about that. There's a lot to learn about Christianity or Buddhism or whatever. But there's also how to put it into practice, how to put religion into practice. So, and then it was the same for you, like learning about these things and then wanting to put it into practice in counseling.
Yes.
That kind of thing. So I like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of clients who come to, I'm actually doing an internship, so that's how I see clients. And a lot of clients who come to the center are women in transition. So they're transitioning in terms of getting a divorce or mostly there's trauma underneath that transition. And they're mostly seeking a purpose. What am I going to do now? I don't have money, but I have kids. My husband was extremely abusive. Things like that. I mean, so I think what religion, spirituality does is that it gives us hope that we are able to do something, we are able to seek, we are able to move on. And I think that grounding makes it even sort of almost safe to seek a future.
And that's what religion should be. It should be a
Yeah.
safe haven for
Yeah.
people.
Yeah.
And I think for too long, historically, it's felt like a place where people feel trapped in something that's bad or suffocated or not felt free, when religion should be the most free thing that people can have and experience.
Yeah.
So they need that safety to be able to turn to.
And I think that does, it can do that for everyone. And I think with clients, I see people who do believe in certain, have religious backgrounds,
Right.
do believe in religion. We do use that in our sessions. So I had a woman who followed Islam, and she had many different things that were happening, but one of the things that she wanted to do was just in the shelter be able to pray 5 times a day.
Yeah.
And that sort of, it was meditative, but that wasn't allowed because her
Really?
roommate said, no, it's too much, you can't do it here. So she had to go outside
Aw.
and do it. So, just sort of understanding, that these things are not just about following a religion, but what it gives us in return. It could be meditative, it can be calming, it can be a space where you arrange your thoughts. But, so we did talk a little bit about the Quran, and she brought in certain verses that we were able to then sort of have, through discussion, connect to something else that was happening in her life. So yeah, I do believe it has a beautiful, healthy space or place in counseling.
Yeah, I agree. And I think people need to also, like we talked about, come there themselves.
Yes.
And arrive to that place themselves.
Absolutely.
And not just accept it for what it is.
Yeah.
And I think that applies to anything on the political spectrum or the social issues spectrum with religion. Like, people need to not just be what they were growing up. Like, I remember for the longest time I was like, I'm a Republican because my whole family's Republican. And then, I had to go through and think about it, and the Republican Party has changed so much.
Yes.
But I think it's the same with religion. And like aggressively questioning why you believe the things you do helps you be the best at that. Like, I think I'm a more well-rounded Christian because I've questioned it a bunch of times and compared it. And I'm getting that way, like, politically, socially, too. I'm still, like, working on both things, everything. And nothing's ever perfect.
Yeah.
But I really like that point, and I'm glad you brought that up originally, because I think it is really important, and I think we can feel unfulfilled if we don't take the time to do that in our lives.
Yeah. And I also believe that we really have to get away from this whole construction of binaries, right? It's one thing or the other. None of us are absolutely on one end or the other.
Yeah.
We're somewhere in between. And so even, I mean, I talk to my students, clients, my kids, that we have to give room for that spectrum of ideas and ideologies and thought processes, because that's how we are going to grow. You know, gender is not just male, female. Sexuality is not just heterosexuality and homosexuality. We are not all bracketed into upper class and working class. I mean, there's so much in between.
Right.
And that, I think we should give religion and culture that aspect as well.
Yeah.
So a lot of times with my students, I talk about cultural practices, because they say things, for example, like, oh, that's so cultural to Africa, or that's so cultural to, you know, America. It's not cultural, because that it's not one monolithic idea or homogeneous in that sense. It's a spectrum. So we can have cultural practices, we can have religious practices, and we can change that if we say it's a practice.
And it's hard to do, because I think as human beings, we're just like built in a way to want to put things in boxes.
Yes.
And to be like, okay, well, that is something that is entirely one thing, is entirely democratic, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
Now I understand it.
Yeah.
Rather than looking at something as a spectrum. And this is something I've thought about a lot, and gone back and forth on. And to me, it kind of comes back to thinking, what's the use of looking at something as a complete binary? How is that the most loving thing to see someone with, to approach someone with? Because we end up just putting someone in a box that doesn't fully belong to them, and then they feel stifled and not understood, and that's no way to develop a relationship in a counseling session, or on a pulpit, or anything like that. And so I think, you know, we have people who do fall into different binaries and that kind of thing, but we need to be able to approach it on the entire spectrum, or else we lose out on everything.
Yeah. I mean, there's a comfort there. There's a comfort for us who might be, you know, sort of perceive ourselves in the majority,
Right.
as heterosexuals, or, you know, or Christians in the US.
Right.
There's a comfort there that, oh, this is an absolute box that I'm very comfortable. But to come out of that comfort zone and to see other people as being, you know, different and in a minority.
Yeah. Well, I also think, like, we see these boxes from the outside, and then as soon as we get into them, we look around, we're like, okay, I'm in the box. Wait a second, everyone's different here.
Right. Even in that box, absolutely.
That's
but
certainly how I feel. Because I know my Christianity is much different than, like, Ben's Christianity. And, like, we can both identify under the same sort of umbrella, but once you get into all these specifics, people have lots of different ways of even living out the same values. Yeah, that's an interesting sort of rabbit hole to go down.
Yeah. I mean, even with Hinduism, I feel the same thing.
Yeah? How so?
Because I think the way I look at Hinduism more as a spiritual cultural practice, a lot of people don't. They look at it as a religion, and maybe some cultural aspects to it, or pluralistic, but, you know, it's a religion. So I view it a little bit differently than other people. So I think it's very much, you know, trying to figure out where we are. Right.
Yeah, that's cool. As a Christian, I always kind of looked at, and still kind of look at, mainly like Hinduism and Islam, and I'm sort of jealous of the cultural practices. I think Christianity falls into a very, like, almost intellectual, academic religion that doesn't have a ton of culture involved besides, like, a Sunday service.
Right.
But I always thought, you know, like I was saying earlier, the nature of a Hindu prayer is really cool. I have a ton of respect for Islam's practice of praying 5 times a day and connecting to God in that way, and having, you know, Ramadan and all these celebrations that are very integral to their culture. I've always just been a little bit jealous of that. I was like, man, Christianity could have something like that. I guess we have like Christmas, which is a special time.
And I mean, I remember my best friend growing up was Roman Catholic.
Okay.
And so, I would go with her for Ash Wednesdays, to the church. I always went to the midnight mass before Christmas. That's also something I really cherished growing up in Bombay, is really having those opportunities. So I grew up around Christians, Muslims, Jews, Parsis, all of these different religions. And a lot of times, when it was Diwali, we would send sweets to their houses. And when it was Christmas, went to,
I love that
midnight mass. And we had all the holidays available.
That's better than,
Right?
We want to have more holidays.
Yeah, and also like on festivals, right? So Diwali was 4 days off. Eid was a day off. So we could celebrate those, those festivals with each other. And I really, really, really loved that exchange. Here, that's missing because we don't have those opportunities. We have to actually go out of our way to make sure that, for example, my kids know. So throughout December, we have this sort of table in our living room where we put in Hanukkah candles, and we do Kwanzaa, the cloth, and then we do Christmas, and then 2 weeks of Christmas vacation is basically we read books on all three. We also make foods, which I'm really bad at, but from the internet, just sort of download.
What have you tried to make?
Oh goodness!
That was like the worst thing that you didn't
God.
execute well.
I don't think anything. I'm not good at cooking.
Yeah. How's your husband fit into the picture with all these different like practices and cultures? Is he into it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
So
great.
as a family, we do all of this. And I mean, even the Sunday school, although it was sort of an organic idea, he was the one who went ahead and started it in terms of getting a website up and, things like that. So yeah, and he teaches at the school as well.
Fun to
So
have him involved.
we always have conversations around how do we do this as a family.
Right.
So we always talk about, when the kids say, but you have to do this. And we always say, no, we are a team. It's a team. There's no, but I thought dad was in charge of this. No, we are a team.
It's us, both of us together.
Yeah. And the 4 of us, and actually the dog too. So now we involve the dog.
How is your dog involved?
We just say they have to take care of him.
Oh, right.
And then we are like, no, he has to, you have to do things for him. Just as, we are a team.
Yeah. Everyone's helping everyone.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Before you came here, I had a bunch of questions written down as like icebreaker questions that I didn't actually need to get to, which is fun. We just jumped into it. But I do have a couple questions I would like to ask because I'd be curious to just hear what your responses are. So I'm going to ask you a couple questions, icebreakers, just about beliefs, because I usually use that to just jump right in.
Okay.
Because it's fun. It worked well last time. And then I want to close out by playing a game called How Hindu is the New Church. Okay. It's kind of like oppositional to what we've just talked about, is how everything's a mixture and you need to question everything and no boxes. But it is sometimes fun to just back up and be like, man, I wonder like how much we align on like major tenets.
Sure.
So first I'm going to ask you a couple questions. First question.
Yeah.
So you die tomorrow. What happens? Are you reincarnated?
Yes.
Is there heaven, hell? What do you think?
So according to Hindu belief, and I believe it
Yeah,
too,
I wasn't sure if your belief differed at all.
Yeah, no, I think I believe in rebirth.
Okay.
And I do believe that if we do good in life, we are going to be born again.
Again, or in a better position, or are we rewarded for how we live this life?
I don't really know on that. But I do believe in rebirth, and I do believe in doing good things. I do believe that heaven and hell are right here on earth while we live, as we live.
I agree with that.
So I do believe in that. It gives me a lot of peace to believe that if I'm doing good, that I will be born as a human being and do better things in life.
So I'm showing my ignorance here, but if you are bad, if you live a bad life,
Yeah.
is there a chance you'll come back as like an ant or something?
Yes, I mean that's the Hindu belief
Cool.
that if you do good, you know, sort of you're reborn as a human being, or there's a hierarchy on
Right.
what you've done today.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, there you go. Well, that's very interesting. Yeah, that's a cool thought. Next question. Can multiple religions be true? Or is there one true religion?
No, I mean, as Hindu.
Yeah, I was kind of guessing
Yeah.
at your answer to this based on our conversation.
Yeah, my belief is that I think we all can coexist, and we should. It would be super boring to have this one matrix.
That's a good way of putting it. I like that. And just as it would be super boring to have every other human being be exactly like me.
Exactly.
Man, I don't know, man.
No, I don't like that. I love the fact that we are different, and I think our differences
Make us stronger.
stronger, and also help us thrive, you know, because we are able to sort of look at each other and hopefully take the best from with each other, connect with each other. And it's not just with human beings. I think it's the connection to, you know, the ecosystem.
Right.
And I think one of the things that, you know, you brought up the Hindu rituals, that's exactly what it is. It's the ecosystem that we live in. So when there is fire, you know, we work around fire a lot with Hindu rituals. It's really the connection between the earth and, you
Right.
know, I mean, all of those sort of energies that are.
I have a weird side question for you. So if the Hindu belief is in reincarnation, and if you live a bad life, you come back as an animal or like a lower sort of thing. Does that play into the way that people treat like the earth and like other living beings? Like, would you be like, oh, well, that person came back as a monkey, so we don't care
Right.
about that?
No. In Hinduism, we believe in the relationship with every living being. And that's why, if you think about it, a lot of deities are actually carved in
Oh, yeah.
stone, right?
Oh, I was going to say like animal
Or
representation.
animal representations too. Yes, absolutely. But even sort of an inanimate object like stone can be revered as God. So there is pran, life energy in pretty much everything that you see. Now, not everyone follows that, but that's sort of the philosophy, that we have to respect even sort of a stone because it's here and it has some sort of life energy.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
That's interesting. to
And
know.
that's why most Hindus are vegetarians.
Right. That makes sense. I like that. And then there's so much respect for everything when you look at it with
Yes.
that lens.
Yes.
Well,
And
that's
there
really
has to be. I mean, I think we cannot be isolated. We can't, again, going back to the arrogance of things, that's not how we should live.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing a lot of negative ramifications from that
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
Right, that's a whole rabbit
Okay.
hole. Next question. This is like a two-parter last question. So I'm curious if you have anything that stands out to you as your best and worst religious experience. So you can take a minute to think about it. Too.
Yeah.
We'll cut the time. No, you're fine. But I think it's interesting because I've certainly had, you know, some times where I'm feeling particularly down or like, wow, this was a really bad time. And I've also just had really like uplifting, spiritually fulfilling, great time. So I'm always curious because I think we usually present in conversations, we present our faith as something pretty steady.
Right.
But everyone has ups and downs and things. So I'm wondering if you had any experiences in your life where you had a really good religious experience or a really bad one.
I think the worst is, I think because Hinduism has the caste system, I think that's really the worst. Because
Do you want to give a quick summary as to what the caste system is? If anyone?
So caste system is that there are 4 castes within Hinduism. The top are the Brahmins or the priest caste, which traditionally or historically had to do with learning. So, they were the priests were the ones who knew the Vedas, our ancient holy texts, if you will, Vedas, Bhagavad Gita, right? Kshatriyas were the kings, and kings and, the priests were sort of together because they...
So that's the first caste.
So priest is up here, then the kings.
Okay.
In sort of the hierarchy, but power always lied with the priests, also because they were the ones who told the kings what to do,
Gotcha.
according to astrology or what,
Right.
And then there are the Vaishnavas, or the business or traders. Historically, they were trader caste, which is, business. And then there are the sort of the quote unquote untouchables, who basically, they are no longer called the untouchables, they are the Harijans. Mahatma Gandhi gave them the name Harijans, which means people of God. But they were sort of historically the people who cleaned, toilets, and they were the people who...
What seems like lower labor.
Yeah, not even labor, they were just the untouchables. Even if their shadow fell on us, people had to go take a shower. And
Oof.
I mean, again, it was terrible, and I always sort of struggled with that. And so the friend that I talked about earlier on was the friend who was from quote unquote the untouchable caste, and they were... So my grandfather was a medical doctor, the first medical doctor in the town that he was. Wow. And so he set up sort of a lot of things. And one of the things was that when someone died in surgery, the corpse, would go into the morgue, and the morgue was where the people from this particular caste worked, because that was the only space given to them. And so when I went to her house, usually there were, dead people around, because that's where they lived.
Yeah.
But she was my friend, so I wanted to play with her.
Yeah, of course.
So that sort of was the worst sort of experience for me when it came to Hinduism, and I completely could not...
The caste system.
Yeah, the caste system, because it really was unbearable in that sense.
How have you come to terms with it now?
My husband is not a Brahmin first. Our marriage is intercaste.
Where did you meet?
So I'm a Brahmin, and he is from sort of the business caste.
Okay.
But, things have changed now. It's more sort of the class that we see, the class system. But again, to me, all of that is intersectional. I personally don't believe in the caste system. Most of the times, I don't even identify as being from sort of the Brahmin caste. And yeah, so that sort of, I really want to challenge that. I want to reject that.
Yeah.
It has no place for me. It should not have any
It's hard to
place
fit into the 21st century.
Yeah, it shouldn't have a place in society.
Cool. Well, then what would you say was your best?
For my curiosity, is the caste system laid out in like any of the official religious texts, or is it like a culturally established?
So that's a really good question. There was a text called Manusmriti, written by Manu himself. He created the caste system, which was actually based on the Varna system. Varna is color. So you'll see that the priest caste, usually they are lighter skin color, and as you go on the hierarchy of the caste, it becomes darker. But again, all of that can be challenged now because there's so much intermixing. Right? But when he wrote the text, he actually assigned the Varna system, the caste system, according to the jobs. So it was sort of to do with labor in that sense. And so
when was that written?
Oh,
sorry,
that's a good question. I know, that's a good question. I don't remember the date off the top of my head, but it was like long time ago.
Like hundreds of years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a good question. So yeah, what would you say, do you have anything that stands out to you as your best religious experience?
Yeah, I think coming back to Hinduism, right, with my children.
Was there like a specific moment for you? Was it like when your first child was born specifically?
Yeah, I think I had a lot of sort of epiphanies when she was born. So the first thing was that, oh my God, I'm never going back to India when she was born, because now here's a child who is going to be American fully and totally. And I respect that and I love it. And by no means, I mean, India is home, and this is home, but when she was born, this became my home fully. The second thing I realized that I needed something to ground myself. I can't go sort of, for her sake, I needed this space where I could explain things to her from my experience and give her a culture, a practice, a religion, spirituality that she can identify with. And so, I would say that was sort of a moment where, I think I came back to it. And that was the best sort of experience to have as well.
That's great.
Yeah.
And thank you for answering my little questions.
Thank you.
Yeah, usually I ask those at the beginning. But they're fun little summary questions.
Yeah,
too.
they were great.
Yeah, oh good, I'm glad. I want to add a couple more to the list. So if you have any ideas, let me know afterward.
Sure.
But I want to close out with this fun little game that I played with people before called How Blank is the New Church. So the New Church is just our denomination of Christianity. And I picked out like 10 main tenets of our faith. And so we played this game with Rabbi Leah Berkowitz to see how Jewish the New Church was, and we weren't super Jewish. We were like 6 out of 10, I think.
Yeah, still
better than average. So basically, I'm going to ask these and just have you answer yes or no, and then I'll tally up and see how Hindu we are at the end.
Okay.
And we were pretty Islam. We had an Islam guy on or a Muslim guy on, and we were like 8 out of 10 tenets were like the same, which was it's interesting to back it up to that degree and look at it.
And I think to the point is that we all come from the same basic, tenets.
Oh yeah.
So hopefully
it's sort of like
more,
the 10 Commandments-ish are very universal.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of universal stuff in there.
I think they're basic human rights in other sense.
And I think it's been nice playing this game and just seeing all the similarities, and because I think we're historically apt to look at religion and be like, I'm different than your religion, and we're not similar, and I don't like you because of it. That's no good. So let's dive in here. Okay, how Hindu is the New Church? First one, and you can just answer it like yes or no, or give a quick explanation if you want. The Lord Jesus Christ is the one loving God.
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. The number 2, the Bible is God speaking through literal stories in a systematic inner meaning.
Only the
Feel
Bible.
no pressure to answer yes or no.
No.
Well, we didn't say only the Bible. It just says the Bible is God speaking through.
Well, we can accept that at times.
Maybe half. I'll give that a 0.5.
Okay.
Number 3, love is the basis of Scripture.
Yes.
Nice. That's a good one right there. Life after death, heaven, and angels are all real.
Yes.
You think?
A little
How's
bit.
that play in with reincarnation then?
So in the sense that, again, there is more to life. So the way I interpret it is that there's more to life than just us. So that can be in the form of angels, that it can be in form of, even sort of reincarnation, where there is also period between life and death when you come back. So there can be many interpretations.
So basically, like, there's a belief in like the spiritual world in Hinduism.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, there may not be angels per se, but something beyond us.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll dock a couple little like mini points there, but basically the same. Yeah. Number 5, salvation is progressive and involves an ongoing process of spiritual growth. So by salvation, we define that as basically the process of being a good person. We don't believe in like, oh, you're instantly saved, like anything like that. But like, yeah, it's progressive.
Yes.
And you're continually spiritually growing.
Yes.
Nice. Number 6, God came to earth as Jesus Christ to overcome the power of evil.
No.
7, happiness comes when we let God inspire our daily work and service to others.
Yes.
Number 8, God endows us with the capacity to choose our eternal destiny. So we choose our destiny. No predestination or anything like that? What do you think? No, on the whole?
No, because in Hinduism, it's sort of, again, a broad interpretation. So a lot of times, there's, and I'm going to sort of forget, but in Hinduism, we say that you just do what you need to do, but everything is predestined.
Okay, so you believe in predestination.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Number 9. Marriage love can become spiritual and continue to eternity. So this is one of our sort of unique beliefs in the new church, that your marriage on earth, if it's really, really good, can last forever, like
Yes.
into the afterlife and that kind of thing.
Yes.
Again, how's that play out with reincarnation?
When
Sorry to
we
keep bringing it up, but I'm just very curious.
No, but that's a good question, because when we get married, we actually, one of the ceremonies is to walk around the fire 7 times. So it's sort of 7 vows, but it also means that you're going to be together for 7 lives.
Aw, that's
Yeah.
cool.
So if it's good, it's great.
Yeah. So do you think that you and your husband were together in previous lives?
I don't know about previous, but I would love to be in the future.
That's great.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's really cute. Last one. Heaven is for all who love God and live according to his commandments. So again, that might be different because I don't know
Yeah.
if heaven's really the same. I mean, heaven's not
Right.
really the
So
same thing.
I
for you.
don't think so.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's tally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.25.
That was very technical, Luke.
This is an incredibly scientific process that we
Yes.
go through here. It's rigorous. It has a lot of deep meaning to it. No, that's really interesting. Hey, it's still 1.5 though.
Yes.
Slightly.
Yeah.
Very slightly.
Yeah.
No, it's fun because we definitely get into the weeds with specific like Jesus
Right.
beliefs and that kind of thing. But when we back up to the whole like happiness comes when we do this.
Right.
That's where I think a lot of the main tenets between the different religions play out.
Yeah. And I think that's how it should be.
Yeah.
You know.
No, that makes sense because we have lots of different little specific dogma things,
Yeah.
but in general, we're all trying to live good lives and be the best people we can be.
Exactly.
And that's really all there is to it.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
on and talking to me about everything. This was really exciting.
Thank you so much.
I learned a lot. This is great for me.
And me too. I
Yeah.
learned
Oh,
quite a
good.
few things.
I'm glad. So
you.
thank you, listeners and viewers, for watching or listening to the Spiritable podcast. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, watch our videos, leave a like and a comment, or go and find the audio version wherever you find it on Stitcher or Google Play or iTunes or wherever you find podcasts. Thank you again, Rujuta. Do you have any like plugs you want to give to the people listening or watching? You want them to find you anywhere or come take a
No.
class that you're teaching or anything?
No, I'm fine. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on, and thank you guys for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well done.
Thank
That was
you
great.
so
So I guess